Hello and welcome back. This is Dividing Real Numbers Part 2. In today's lesson we will cover two concepts that are necessary in division, and those concepts are reciprocal and using zero. So let's start with reciprocal. Well, what is a reciprocal? This principle applies to real numbers that are not zero. So negative and positive integers, your counting numbers, your whole numbers, these are all the numbers except for zero. And basically, you learn this concept because it's necessary in order to divide. So let's start with something really simple. Let's take A. Assume that A is a number. If you write A as a fraction, you come up with A over 1. And the reciprocal of that is simply you flip it upside down and you get 1 over A. Okay, so let's do this with a number. Negative 8. Negative 8 is the same thing as the fraction negative 8 over 1. And that negative sign applies to the whole fraction. You can write it a little bit lower so that it's even with a line if you want to signify that. And the reciprocal of the fraction negative 8 over 1 is a negative 1/8. Okay, so let's get into how to know that you have a reciprocal, because reciprocals are necessary for division, but you want to be able to check your answers. So, the basic rule is that the product between a number and its reciprocal is always going to be 1. So, these two numbers would be reciprocals of each other if their product is 1. For example, let's take 2. 2 is 2 over 1. The reciprocal is 1/2. Well, how do you know that? You start by multiplying 2 over 1 times 1/2. You multiply these two separate numbers to find out if they are in fact reciprocals, because up here you decided that 1/2 was the reciprocal of 2 over 1, and you simply check it by multiplying 2 over 1 times 1/2. So let's do that now. 2 times 1 is 2, and 1 times 2 is 2. So it equals 2 over 2. What can 2 over 2 be reduced to as a final number? Exactly. 2 over 2 can be reduced to 1. Our answer is 1, and that is how we know that we're dealing with two numbers that are reciprocals. Okay. Now, the whole reason why we are learning reciprocals is because of division. Dividing by a number is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal of it. So this is one of those concepts where in order to do it, we are going to need to use another mathematical principle. You remember when we were subtracting, okay, and then we had to sometimes occasionally add in order to subtract. Well, in this case, we will be dividing, and we will have to multiply in order to divide. And the reciprocal comes into play because you multiply times the reciprocal. For example, let's take 2/3 divided by a negative 1/4. Well, what's the first thing that we do? They do have unlike signs. You will notice the 2/3 is positive, the 1/4 is negative. But the first thing that we're going to do before we figure out anything at all is flip the divisor upside down. Flip the number upside down, and that would be 1/4. So 2/3 and a negative 4/1 is what we'll have. And since we flipped it, we're just going to multiply. You can use a dot. You can use an X mark. You can simply put them both in parentheses. There are several different ways as long as you rewrite this division as a multiplication problem. And this happens a lot when you're dealing with this type of math. You rewrite the problem as something else. And if you try to do it in your head, at this point, you'll probably get the answer wrong. So please get into the habit of rewriting everything. Just like we had to rewrite the addition and the subtraction problems, we're going to rewrite this division problem as a multiplication problem in order to solve it. Okay, so now that we've done that, we are simply going to multiply, left to right up here. 2 times 4 is 8. 3 times 1 is 3. So you have a new fraction, 8/3. Look at your signs. What do you have? Well, you have unlike signs. And as we studied in the previous lesson, our answer is always going to be negative when we have unlike signs. So you have a negative 8/3. Always check to see if you can reduce your answer any further when you're dealing with fractions. So, what times 3? How many times does 3 go into 8? Well, 3 times 2 is 6, but you have 2 numbers left over. That's okay. 3 times 2, so you put the 2 out here and the 3 at the bottom. 3 times 2 is 6, and you have 2 left over, so you put that 2 at the top. This was negative, as you recall, so it's going to be a negative 2 2/3, and we are done. That is our final answer. Okay, let's see. Let's do one more like this. Here we have a different sign on the top than what we have on the bottom, because this is going to be, it's not going to be one fraction divided by another. It's simply going to be one number divided by another number. In the previous one, we had 2/3 divided by a negative 1/4. We had a fraction divided by a fraction. This is simply here written in a fraction form, but it's basically going to be one number divided by another number. Move the decimal points over so that you simply have a positive 8 going into a negative 56. Okay? 8 times 7 is 56. Your signs are different. You have unlike signs, so that's a negative 7. And there's your answer. You can check your answer with division at any time by simply multiplying the quotient times the divisor. Let's do that right now. Our quotient, or our answer, was negative 7, so you multiply that times the divisor that was in the bottom over here, 0.8. It was a positive 0.8. And a negative 7 times a positive 0.8 is a negative 5.6. Now, if you were going to move the decimal over, it would have been negative 7 times a positive 8. But every time you do something like that, when you move the decimal over, to multiply, you're going to have to move it back, because what you would have gotten would have been a 56, and it's wrong. You need to move that decimal point back over to get your negative 5.6. And 5.6 was the dividend. So basically, you have everything falls back. When you do it in reverse, you get the number at the top. 0.8 times -7 is the dividend. So the quotient was, in fact, -7. And there you have it. Okay, the next concept